This is the Whimsy Farm Podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane.
There's a big wide world right out your door. Good people doing good things. Whoa, it's a big, big wide world. Now is the time. Now is our time.
Welcome, everyone. On episode 7, we talk about the life and death importance of thinking with philosopher Elizabeth Minnich. She recently released the expanded edition of her 2017 book, The Evil of Banality. Minnich received her doctorate at the New School, where she was Hannah Arendt's teaching assistant. For 25 years, she was a professor at the Union Institute. She also wrote Transforming Knowledge, and with community organizer Si Kahn wrote The Fox in the Henhouse, How Privatization Threatens Democracy. We're going to talk about the release of the extended version of your book, The Evil of Banality, and the expanded edition. The subtitle is On the Life and Death Importance of Thinking. I found this book helpful, Elizabeth. It helped me understand what the heck is going on. And I thank you for that. I appreciated the way you organized the book. It's in 3 sections, and I thought we would just go through each part and give the audience an idea of what you're talking about. So, the first part, you focus on 2 types of evil. I'd never really thought about this before, but you categorize extensive evil versus intensive evil. Could you talk a little bit about what the difference is?
Yes, and thank you for going directly to that, because that's the kind of keystone, really, for much of the book. I came upon the distinction between intensive and extensive evils when I was on this quest to understand how it is that so many people can be involved in enormous harm doing, taking off from the Holocaust and my teacher Hannah Arendt's work on the banality of evil. I got interested in the evil of banality. What is it about banality that has anything to do with evil? So I'm studying all kinds of evils, which I define just as horrific harm doing, beyond the scale of bad. We say evil when we can't, bad won't do, when categories have been broken. So I'm deeply immersed in reading, certainly Holocaust studies and enslavement and through the ages, cross cultures. And I had serial killers, and I had this, anything that sort of had this horror, this moral horror around it, and sort of shivered, in front of you. And at some point, it came to me that I needed to make this distinction, because otherwise, in one of these kinds, which hadn't been named as kinds, to my knowledge, I was going to misunderstand it. And so here's what struck me. There are these evils that are where there's moral equivalence between the deed and the doer. Something really monstrous, somebody extraordinary. I always use Jeffrey Dahmer as a handy example, because he piled like 4 or 5 shocking things on top of each other, like kidnapping and raping little boys and killing them and eating them. That's evil. And we don't doubt that he is. There's just no question. There's a moral equivalence in some sense there. That is not the rest of us. That's not something where you could shake your head and say, oh dear, it could have been me. No, it could not. So these are the intensive evils. Small group, 1 or 2 people, 1 person, short duration, extraordinary, literally outside of the ordinary. Everybody around is shocked, horrified, huge repercussions for years sometimes, but most people were not involved at all and are speechless in the face of it because it's so extraordinary. That tends to be our model of evil. Evil people do evil things. Monsters do monstrous things. It's romanticized, but it's also the picture we have. Surely no normal person could do that. It's just, we go into the id, we go into the devil, we go into possession, we go into some kind of madness, something explains this that isn't ordinary. Then there are, however, the extensive evils. These are instances of great harm doing that are prolonged, decades in Rwanda. I'm sorry, that's months, 3 months, longer than one little killing spree, a burst, then over, sustained. Sometimes they go on for years, as with the Holocaust, as with enslavement, millennia, and cross cultures, and persists now in multiple forms. Sexual violation of the vulnerable, millennia, everywhere. Enormous harm doing. Okay, how, well, requires a lot of people to do them, and they have to be normalized or they won't last. You can't commit genocide in a burst of passion. You can't sustain it long enough. You can't do it with 4 or 5 people who are possessed by virulent hatred. Even if everybody who does it has genocide or enslaving or raping or even if they do have hatred, it can't be sustained for decades, for months, even really for a week for the most part. What you have to have is what a torturer for the United States government, where it was illegal, but nonetheless, I found an interview with such a person. And he said, you don't want people who enjoy it. They tend to be unreliable and prone to bizarre other problems. You want reliable workers who can do the job, come to the job, do the job, go home, and do it over and over again as a part of their lives. It has to be normalized then. Science, religion, social orders, all of these come along. They normalized slavery. There are scientific theories explaining why it's okay, even appropriate. They're still around. Some of them, they're pseudoscience now, but they were authoritative science in the time. Religions have, they get normalized. Those are the extensive evils. And those are the ones where the moral equivalence goes back to what I was saying, doesn't hold. It's very difficult to conceive of 100,000 people working in something like slavery-based economy, making it possible in many ways, as well as overseeing the slaves. But you have the shipbuilders and everybody else who makes it possible. It can't go on unless it's been normalized, unless you have reliable workers who are leading decent lives, as defined at the time. People who later, outside of such a phenomenon, would be horrified. Then we go into a whole other array of things, but that's extensive, intensive.
There's a cartoon floating around that has three panels, and the first is a cavalry band arresting an Indigenous American, and the second is a Civil War soldier holding a slave captive, and the third is an ICE agent holding an contemporary non-legal person. And the caption says, "I'm just following orders."
Well, yes, this is always a thing that people say to each other. They will also say, however, it has to spread even wider than that. I'm just following orders. This needs to be done. I'm doing my job. It's a good job, or it's a better job than I could get elsewhere. I'm a good person. I'm supporting my family. I'm good to my family. So I'm just following orders is kind of specific. And bumps on one side onto the Nuremberg laws, as you know. It is actually, and I happen to know that ICE at least used to several years ago do trainings with its employees precisely about the Nuremberg protocols. If you are given an unjust, illegal order, you are liable for what you do in the name of that order. It's not excuse, it's not exculpation, it's nothing of the sort. And as I said, I had a friend who worked, an extended family member who worked for ICE at one point, and we were talking about the things I talk about, and she sent me materials from one of their trainings. So doing my job, following orders, yeah, it can be even more mindless than that, in the sense that there are all kinds of other kinds of reasons given.
You mentioned in part one that love is not necessarily the solution to this problem. Can you talk a little more about that?
That's interesting, Carolyn. It's true, for years, every time as I was talking and listening, and of course I learn a great deal from how when I'm working on something from people being kind enough to talk back and with me. And somebody always wants to know, so why don't you talk more about love? I have, if I winnow it down, we can do more or less, up to you. But I think I'm going to have to say, I don't know many people who love wisely and well. Do you? Do you really want to rest? Principles of justice, hard choices about this job I can't do because this one is over the line. Um, I've done this, but I know I shouldn't. I'm going to have to stop. You want to leave that in the hands of a powerful emotion that is very often every bit as abstract as thinking. Picks out a few things and we fall madly in love with it. And love is blind. I do not put love down. It's a wondrous thing. I don't think you can rely on a powerful emotion when we're talking about things that have been normalized, can be normalized. I'll go for common decency and a clear mind.
One of the things that I've noticed lately in my own world, and people I know have mentioned it too, that you talk about in part one, is the subtle change in behavior of those around us that are buying into the extensive evil. You talk about the Jews in the Holocaust noticing that suddenly the storekeeper would not make eye contact with them, or they knew them last week but not this week, and there's a heavy foreboding silence that they felt in the beginning of the Holocaust as more and more people got on the bandwagon, as it were. And I'm seeing that today in the way some people choose not to relate to me or people that I know in the movement. Suddenly there's a trepidation of getting too close. Do you see that? Can you talk a little bit about why that dynamic exists?
Let me say one other thing from what we were talking about before, which is I simply wanted to say respect um, for the emotional relation to other people. We have to respect other people. We don't have to love them. We do have to respect them. So that should be a part of that. I certainly am seeing it and I'm hearing it. Um, it's a it's this kind of like fog on the ground moving. You can see things will sort of quietly disappear and get covered, and the atmosphere feels different. Um, what comes to my mind immediately when my now all too well informed, not for necessarily now, but I mean, this book came out first before Trump was even had been inaugurated the first time. I've been doing this for years before. But so what raised my flag was a friend, a very good friend of mine for many, many years, who's notable in all kinds of ways. Um, and she said to me with pride in her voice that, by God, this is early on in this administration and we're not all that far into it. She said, you know what I did today? She said, I took my name off all the causes that I give money to because, They'll never find me, she said. They'll never find me now. Nothing had happened to any of those causes. She's going to defund the left, as somebody said, in order immediately. She was feeling shrewd and protective. And, they can't fool me. I know how they work. So, I'm getting ready to hide. So what happens is that we start, whether we have direct reason to fear, actually, or there's something to be said there about random people who are setting in an extensive evil, which takes time. That's what we're seeing, is the setting in. To normalize horrific things, there are stages and steps. There's even a kind of playbook. And it takes time. And random acts make people fear who haven't been threatened and aren't even likely to be, categorically, or at least not right away. They will be. We all are, actually, immediately. Because if they take some, they're practicing taking the next and the next. And the homegrowns, as Trump said. We're coming for the homegrowns next, he said. Anyhow, they practice and it moves on out. So people get frightened, and sometimes it's random. This student, but not that one. So you can't get your feet under you. So people go into, variously protective, anxious mode, and that's part of that fog that builds. And then they don't know for sure what you're likely to do, and you might put them at risk. I felt that when I was traveling in Turkey a year ago. People were careful about talking to me, and I got careful in return because I didn't want to get them in trouble. I feel some of that here now. I've always felt some of it, as I'm sure you have. I mean, I'm feminist and I'm progressive, and and there were always people who were a little careful because I didn't quite trust, that I wasn't going to get them in trouble. That has gone up. It has certainly gone up. And then, as you were saying, Carolyn, there are people who I always say that there's concentric circles. That's how this stuff works. Sort of moves out and spreads. It kind of pulses in and out across these circles. There are people who actually like what's happening. And so far, they feel exempt and safe, and they think this needed to be done, and they like having all this. They like having somebody be in charge, finally, sort of we're going to get some order back. And no, they know to be concerned because there's ugly stuff going on. They know that. And they're not sure they necessarily like these feelings in themselves. Actually, some do, some don't, but there's often a tremor. And that makes you back off from people too. So, and then all the way over to you're thinking about it, you're aligning yourself, they used to call it, in occupied France when the Nazis were there. There was the wait and see, we don't know yet, which means you just go silent and wait while they set in and start doing their great harm, do anything, because you say, well, we don't know yet, we'll see. And he talks like that, but he doesn't mean it. No. They called him the attendiste. Right? And then you adjust yourself. That was another one of the terms. You adjust yourself to what's going on. You just, alter a few things that make it possible that you'll keep your job, make it possible that you'll get a better job. Maybe you'll get a raise because that person disappears. It's not like quicksand. It draws you in. And some people welcome it from the beginning, and some people call it from the beginning. We've got the whole array. And as you were saying, you don't always know when you're talking to somebody which one they are at this moment. And maybe there was somebody else yesterday, because things change in our emotions and our fears and the sense of threat, and our maybe liking of it and maybe agreeing with it, maybe even enjoying it. I've seen people saying, take them away when they're hauling somebody off with, so we've got a full array there. And the ICE agents, they'll pull their masks over their faces. They don't want to be seen. I find that, first off, it's chilling, of course, profoundly. So there's a recognition there, too, that you ought not be seen doing this. Your family might not like They saw what you actually do. Your religious institution might not. So there's a fracturing, an isolating, even from ourselves, because we will find ourselves in situations we don't like, and we won't always do what we think we should. So we start also getting a little uncomfortable about ourselves, wondering to spread across so many, you have to get many to participate in doing the work. You can't point a gun at everybody. These days, you can do a lot more harm to everybody overnight. But you want people to do it for you. And that's what's been practiced now under many of these horrific harms.
You flipped the tables in part two, and I have to say, at that moment, I had a big aha because the tagline for this podcast is "Good people doing good things."
Mm-hmm.
This comes from a quote of Utah Phillips, about whom I'm writing a biography. And this quote is widely disseminated. And the whole quote is, too many people, no, too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
When I read part two, it hit me that what Utah was talking about was extensive good specifically. And just as you offer definitions for extensive and intensive evil, you offer definitions for extensive and intensive good. A couple of my favorite quotes, that from the book, on page 124, you say, extensive good, like extensive evil, requires many people acting reliably together in time. And a couple pages later, the most evident virtues of the doers of extensive good are often the very basic, unromantic ones of hardiness, perseverance, and the reliability, the trustworthiness these underwrite. That reminded me of Dorothy Day, who was, of
Mm-hmm.
course, Utah Phillips's mentor. So I got all that wrapped up in a powerful bow for me when I read part two. Can you talk a little bit about um, what is the power and the hope in extensive good?
Well, I think you touched on the power beautifully. With extensive good, I mean, since it's, as you say, it's the obverse of extensive evil, it means good has been normalized. And I heard this often from people I spoke with and things I read, and testimonials, such as you know very well, and interviews with somebody who's done something that everybody thinks is heroic and wonderful and so forth. But very commonly, most commonly of all, people will say convincingly, I didn't do anything so special. What was I supposed to do? Here's this child drowning. Of course I went in. I mean, what are you going to do? Or there's a Jew at my door. There's somebody without papers at my door. There's somebody coming to my, I'm going to slam the door in their face. I mean, that's not good. That's just what you do. When that has set in, and it can't do that, or it rarely does it. Maybe I shouldn't make that sound quantitative at all, because it's very widespread. It can be very widespread, and there are many instances of it when we're seeing a lot of its fruits now, here. Also, people have learned again, really the obverse of what we were saying before. They are in touch with themselves. We, at moments, various people, I don't want to make it sort of they, because it spreads when there's community and experience, that leads to trust, not a blind trust, proven trust over time. It's just ordinary. You know perfectly well that if you go down the hall and knock on your neighbor's door, you will get the help you need, because it's happened before, and because you've given it, and because it's not even special. You say, of course, it's what you say. It's what you do. So we can be in touch with ourselves. Our conscience is active and watching all the time. And we care about acting well enough that we can be our own friend. You know, probably a fair number of us flagellate ourselves a lot. But we know, well, you don't do that to other people, and we come back and say, I could be kinder to myself too. But that awareness is important. That's a friend watching you who trusts you to want to be good. It's not a saint. It's not, huge aspirations. It's just, this is me, that's you. We live in this world together. And it too moves in these kinds of concentric circles. That's implicit in what I was saying. You can have a small group that gets started. Community organizers know this. Labor organizers know this. Um, all kinds of organizers know this. You can start with a very few people who get to know each other, and you spend time getting to know each other, and you don't only talk business. um, it's warmer and more supportive than that. So um, over time, then you can reach out to other people, and other people start coming, and they will be welcomed. And as in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with the Civil Rights Movement, um, it was notorious, as no doubt you know, for talking endlessly. I used to be just, people joked all the time, don't go to a SNCC meeting, you'll never get out. um, just, no, I'm not coming tonight. I need to sleep. I haven't slept for 3 days. Crucial, constant, not always necessarily through meetings, but processing, watching each other with respect and care. So we don't fracture ourselves, so that we can't, when we betrayed ourselves too many times, we do betray ourselves, and we can deal with that variously. We have, and we want then to get back to being our own friends. And in some circumstances, that's very difficult. In others, we have this kind of community and many more opportunities, and it can wash over in ways that make us again able to be our own friends because we have friends around us. It builds, it's exponential, so that you get instances um, like it's become the famous one. There are many others, but it's such a good story, and it has good books about it now. The village of Le Chambon in southern France, where everybody there resisted the Nazis just quietly. They just took in Jews and got them over the border to Switzerland. They were all ready for that. In time, in the quote, this kind of resistance needs to be in time if if you want to stop extensive evils. There's a famous pacifist who said you can't lay your gun down in the middle of the war. You'll just get people killed. It has to be in time. You can do it. You can do a grand gesture, and sometimes we need grand gestures. I wouldn't. Oh, we do need saints too. We need the intensive too. But if you really want to change things, it has to be beforehand and built so that it's there in place. And one of the things that struck me today here in this country, and I kept trying to say it to people, I just wanted to say early on, it's so early on. Nonetheless, earlier on, we have a remarkable number of organizations, large, established, like ACLU and so forth, right, to tiny, local, and grassroots. And I spent some time ago in the South. We were working with small grassroots groups to make sure they knew each other, so that there was networking possible. We'd have gatherings and stuff. They weren't going to plan anything. We weren't going to try and do anything particular. They had their work to do, but we wanted people to know each other across the South. So that's the kind of preparation that I know I can tell by your podcast. You know very well, we make it normal.
Part three, you offer a scenario um, that talks about the seductiveness of extensive evil, how people are lured in by being in the in crowd or by the opportunities that it has to offer for those privileged enough to be able to be in the power group. And I was just reading in the Times, there was a gathering in Dallas of young conservative women a few days ago. And the tagline of it was less burnout, more babies, which
Mm.
I think anyone who's a mother knows that having a baby is not
Yeah.
necessarily mutual exclusive from burning out.
No.
But the demographics are frightening. That age group of women is more conservative than liberal, and it's an unusual precedent historically because typically that age group is more
Mm.
lefty than righty, but that's not happening with this 18 to 24, and they are being seduced into the MAGA culture by promises of abundance in children being taken care of, uh, the role model roles that are predictable and sustainable. One other thing one of the speakers said is less feminism, more femininity, and these young women were eating this up. So in part three, you talk about how this happens. One of the things you talk about as a culprit of this seductive nature is careerism.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about how careerism, which is sort of the spawn of capitalism, how that plays into the extensive evil framework that we're seeing today?
Yes, and let me say, Carolyn, that you've done it again. That's key. And I find that people don't want don't if they say don't want to hear careerism, um, they sort of they'll stick with I talk about status and greed, and careerism is the trifecta that hooks people in. Small sins, not the big sins. Is not the devil. We're in something normalized. No, these are the ones that hook people in. Um, and careerism, the one that it always falls off the deck. I don't want to hear it. Um, so that interests me. That's usually a marker that there's something there. We don't, that there's recognition, and we don't want to take it seriously. Although I also still listen to people who tell me I'm wrong about that. Um, careerism is this throughout this section in the book. I talk about enclosures of thought. Um, Life and Death Importance of Thinking is the subtitle of the book, as you said. And one of the lines in the book is people who are not thinking are capable of anything. That was my stunning, I kept coming upon that. And people who themselves have done great evil would say that. It's not like you're thinking, said Prime Evil in South Africa. You're getting the job done. You're not thinking. That's what, so, this kept coming at me from people that I read about who talked about it, they weren't thinking. So I started noticing these enclosures of thought where we move inside an ideology, a job culture, a career pattern, um, a subculture, and it becomes as careerism. When it becomes careerism, our workplace becomes the source of our identity and our status and our friendships, our romances, our drama, our gossip, or you name it, it becomes the world such that, and we're thinking about it, it's like gambling. There's advancement and you could lose it, and there's this relationship. It can be all absorbing, as we know. And young ages, when you're moving into work, I remember, and I've certainly seen it since talking about our work with people I was working with, every bit as much as we talked as teenagers about, what we looked like and it was just a constant, obsessive, ridiculous thing. Hours on the telephone, be some different media now and so forth, but you move inside it and the terms are there and you're trying to figure out how to work it. How's this world going to work? It's exciting, it's scary, and what happens, particularly with the gambling aspect, well, it gives you greed and gives you some money and it gives you status, and both improve if you play the game right. So it has that gambling. aspect to it, and hard work, not just chance, although chance comes in. What happens is the world outside of that bubble is just an occasion for practicing that bubble. I'm sorry, I just remembered our youngest at one point opening the door of the house, and there's this great big person in a firefighter's uniform is about to raise money. And our little guy looked up and said, "Who are you?" And this guy said, "I'm a fireman." And the little guy loved him, stepped back and said, "Unsay what?" I said, "Who?" Isn't that good?
You did good, Mom.
Yeah, I was, oh boy, I'll quit right now. I'll take that. Wow. Mm. That's what we forget. We'll say, I'm a lawyer, I'm a professor, I'm a salesperson, I'm a this, I'm a blogger, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm an influencer, I'm a this. That's okay. That can erase, obviously, awareness, as I said, of the world outside, and that and those who are affected by the work we're doing. The world that is affected, always, small, huge, it is affected. And that means we're not, if nothing else, it means we're less likely to be on time when things are changing dangerously. I keep using the obvious example now. You have law firms of all kinds of firms that will pay hush money, which is not what law firms are supposed to do, and make deals in order to keep the firm healthy, not the law. That's what I mean. That's careerism writ large. You cannot let the firm go. You cannot lose your job in Congress. Who are you then? You're nothing. If you this is it become you've forgotten what it was for. One, if it was for something good, and you're not paying attention outside of it. So that's careerism has that kind of intensity, all absorption. There are lots of other enclosures that we move into and out of, but careerism is a big one, particularly in a job-holding society, culture, economy.
I
Not so much.
appreciate what you said about what your little one said too. And a pet peeve of mine is when the first question out of someone's mouth, and people I love do this, and it's so cringy to me. What do you do? Hello, nice to meet you. What do you do? That's the first thing, not how are you? Or I don't know. There's got to be something else. And I remember
Mhm,
I had a seminal moment in my teens when a friend of mine was saying that when her mother was asked, "What do you want your daughter to be when she grows up?" That was a routine question,
mhm,
back in the day. I don't know if it still is. "What do you want your daughter to be when she grows up?" And this woman would reply, "Happy."
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And I use that when they said, "What do your sons do?" Well, they're happy.
mhm,
And to try to disconnect that uh, automatic response of being productive in a capitalist society from being an individual on the planet.
mhm, mhm. And member of multiple communities, except of course with the dynamic of corporate capitalism, et cetera, people have less and less time. Those are, and they do retreats and they do things together. They try and make it ever more completely absorbing. So you really are saying something about who you are. So you feel that when you do it, and that has certainly that's changed and can only continue to change. So I think now I'm playing sociologist, which I'm not, with some of our younger folks. I mean, many people are younger to me at this point, but the younger ones beginning careers and jobs and in more independence and so forth at a time when things have been rather scary economically. A lot of changes taking place, scary about the climate and the planet, scary about um, whether there really would be a good job, scared about debt going out into the world, so forth. It was we've had lots of scary times. I wouldn't even exaggerate this. It's not like this is by any means the worst, but that doesn't mean it isn't, intense for people coming into it. Am I going to be able to get that job? Any job that's any good at all, and ever more pressure on colleges and universities to prepare for a job. And those reports about successful graduates. I've worked in education my whole life, so this one blew my mind, like your example blew yours. Uh, Entry into good jobs direct from college. They did reports on colleges, how many of their people went directly into good jobs. Well, you have to define good, don't you, for that? But you know what they meant. Highest paying. Period. Period. And then people started doing things like, well, people who have liberal arts degrees end up actually over a lifetime making more. They just don't, they start out at less. But in the overall, so we're going to have the argument on those grounds. So, I mean, there are a lot of dynamics, as we know, going on here. And I think it has been really acute, again, recently, as we become even more dependent on jobs and safety nets wobble. And the United States, of course, is pretty horrific about that. If we had anywhere decent safety nets around, this kind of desperation wouldn't set in, but people like the desperation. You want a hungry workforce, even a desperate workforce if you can get it. So I think it's not an inaccurate anxiety. So then people come along and say, okay, community, love, care, be with, children who will, of course, automatically love you fully and no problem. No, and forever. Yeah, fat chance for that. It's more complicated than that. But the image is sort of this, enfolding and holding and having somebody take care of you. Good heavens, that's got to feel good in these times. So, you can, I can understand, I can inhabit it imaginatively. Me, it would send running in the opposite direction, but I understand that. I mean, I'm only comfortable if I'm out. I'm not comfortable if I'm in too far. But I don't think that's even normal. Who knows? In any case,
Well,
it's scary.
I know a young woman who lives in the South who was not there in Dallas, but who could have been, and I care deeply for her. And she is terrified. She is so stressed about all the decisions that she needs to make in society and doing it right and doing it properly and doing it in alignment with her faith. And it stresses her out so much. And I can see that this would be a panacea
Mhm.
to be offered this kind of shelter in late stage capitalism, which to her is the world of opportunity if she could only get a handle on it.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about you have a new chapter in this expanded edition
Mhm.
that you wrote just for just for it, and it is about lying. Could you talk about why you wanted to include this new chapter in the book and why you think lying is of such importance in today's political climate?
I actually rewrote something just to be what honest, full disclosure. I had that piece, and it had long been the one that I heard from people most about. So I knew it was responding to something, and then it came to mind when it was suggested we do an expanded edition of this book, which had suddenly become topical, all too topical. Um, Lying, to me, like violence, is a shortcut to violating reality, to trying to exercise a kind of magic power to make things go the way you, collective or singular, want something to go, or just something to stop that you don't like. Quickly, ideally, absolutely. You don't deal with your child, you whack them. No, this is just stop. Violence has that temptation to it. I will roll in the tanks and we'll just get rid of them all. We'll blow them all up. It's a bizarre kind of mysterious, magical power, like calling in the genies to just take care of things. It's a temptation. I think it's a constant temptation. Just stop. Lying is, I think, much more like that than we usually think of it. And as we watch it playing out as a fully recognized public phenomenon, not even denied, not even shameful, we get to see more of what it was that I was seeing in this. Lying is the same thing. I didn't do that. Or I won. Or you just say what you wish was real, what you have decided is real. And politically speaking, that has, as does violence, with lying, it has, of course, very serious repercussions. For one thing, if it's a political lie, it's more than likely that there is then a stake in making it true. Again, a violation of reality. We see this throughout history too. I mean, if you want to enslave people, you get falsehoods about inferiority that then get preached as truths and so forth. These are lies. They're not true. Experienced women were only intuitive, can't possibly be rational, and so forth, out there for a long time. Well, okay, that's a lie. It's said. Experience constantly undercuts it. It persists. And then simultaneously, what we see is they aren't as rational as we, the few, are, so we deny them education. Well, if enslaved people were as animal dumb as was falsely said, you wouldn't have to deny. You wouldn't have to make literacy a capital crime. You wouldn't have to, because you couldn't do it anyhow. So you get the social order gets moved with political pushes and shoves and guarding to make those lies true, to keep things in order, and the people who are in power and the groups that are in power and the classes that are in power. So a great deal of structure goes into creating, in effect, falsehoods. You lock up more of them than your folks, and you can run it across all kinds of phenomena. So I think they're very familiar. And we're seeing a whole lot of lies now. And that tells me, on the one hand, right away, this is violence. This is not just, oh, he talks that way. He's just like that. Oh, well, but he doesn't mean it. He's saying, yes. First off, it sets off a program that then, we have to build a wall. Oh, okay. Then we have to do this. Then we have to do this. Then we have to do this in order to have that stand further. And of course, it circles back and they license each other. You have to keep upping the rhetoric and so forth. Another thing that it does is that when truths are spoken by known, unabashed, daily liars, they're ignored. They're written off. We become unable to discern which is which. And even if you can, which in fact you usually can, I mean, if somebody who's talking to a dictator from another country, to whose notorious prisons he's sending people illegally, and says to this dictator, we see him say it, it was taped, build 5 more. We're going to need more. We're after the homegrowns next. I wouldn't write that off as a lie. Oh, well, he does that. Why would you do that? Look at the record. So what happens is that our discerning minds, it's another reason I talk about our minds when it would be more usual to talk about love or something like that. Our discerning, love is not necessarily known for its discernment either, which is one of its blessings most of the time. I mean, heaven help, right? But our discerning minds need to be able to sort these things out, to be paying attention. I keep saying throughout the book, we need to be able to be startled back into thought. Like, do you hear what he just said? No, he's got a phrase for it already. The homegrowns. He's talking to somebody who will build those prisons because I like making that money. This is state level visit in the White House. You can't just say, oh, well, he's like that. But you
And
have,
yet they do.
yeah.
And so many of Christians and the Christian right who are aligned with the Ten Commandments, one of which says not to do that, seem like they've somehow been inoculated against caring about
Mhm.
that habit. What, why, how does this cognitive dissonance take hold? How can we break through it as we try to make a connection with these people?
What do you mean by habit?
His habit
Oh, his habit.
um, of lying and creating an action plan out of that falsehood. And
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to phase the Christian right at all. It puzzles me exceedingly.
Mhm. Lying and then setting out to make it true. So we should pay attention, as well as to the bald statements that are not lies at all. Both of those are the two prongs of that thing. Um, well, I know it is deeply troubling, and um, so I've heard, I'm sure some of the responses that you have when I've talked with people, which we keep trying to do, of course. They will say, well, God works in mysterious ways. And you've heard this, God often uses bad people. And this was needed. We need help, we need salvation. And God sent us this person who's going to break everything, and it needed to be broken. It was a sinful world, and um, God is making use of him. Who am I to judge? It's God world, and God is all powerful. So, and all good and all knowing. And this is happening. So, you know, who am I? And I've heard this in variations, as I'm sure you have, and people say it publicly too. And then there's this other, which has always been, I don't know, profoundly troubling to me. And my philosopher way of putting this is, it's tricky in a world to have more than one absolute and compete in competition. And religions do have an absolutizing quality to them. They tend to have, they vary, and people's ways of adhering and living by, of course, vary enormously. But the framing is, there's truth, capital T, revealed, unrevealed, enacted, hidden, as it, to be depicted, not to be depicted. So it also is elusive, and we can't know it. So we shouldn't overuse our minds. We should open to it. That's not going to help with discernment in some moments. Does with some people magnificently, as we know, some of them are most important people leading opposition and good works are within this frame, or some such frame. But there is a part of it, such a framing, that says, there are people who are outside the faith, and you know they should be saved. And we've had crusades, which are hard to explain too by proper religious principles. And we've had witch burnings, and we've had all kinds of enormous cruelty in the name of saving and purifying and so forth. Everything has its dangers. It seems to me part of what we see within the religious science has its huge dangers when it declares that there are low IQ people and morons, idiots, etc. Those were technical terms in science at one point to rank the intellectually challenged, as we would say now, or differently minded. The various phrases that came from science. It's not like, and that's hard-headed rational. So it's not like we've got alternative over here. It's faith, and people yield and go along with it and submit, and to whatever, and the leaders are doing the interpretation and people are following, which happens. It happens in science too. So we're dealing with something that crosses these realms, I think, actually. And it's particularly heartbreaking for all of us when it happens in the areas where we dwell most. I've found myself for years having to say to people, watch out for philosophers. Actually, there's a passion for explaining things, for clarifying, for getting to a coherent, cohesive view, explanation, and comprehension that just pushes and pushes and pushes and pushes. And as Einstein said, you have to stay in touch with reality too, or you won't get truth.
Our time is closing, but I want to wrap up by asking you, at the end of the book, you mentioned that you're working on a new book, a book about education, and you close this book with a wonderful rubric of what you look for in papers today. And I will use that as I am also in education. Can you tell us a little bit about your next book, what we can expect, and when it's coming out?
Well, thank you for asking. The other piece added to this expanded edition is called Teaching Thinking. And that you'll find that's has about the papers and so forth in it. Now, I say that right away, not just to say it's in the book, but because I didn't write the book. I started to, Carolyn, I did. And I hope I still will. We'll see. But what emerged, I started to. And what emerged was a book that's at publishers right now called What Does It Mean to Be Human? Because of things happening around, I call what I do philosophical field work. It's sort of things come at me, things happening in the world, and I think I need to understand this. I don't, as you did with some of the Christian evangelists that are supporting Trump's like, I need to understand this. So I just kept going back to how do people sustain this looking at another human being, getting to know often, certainly when it's men getting to know women, and back when we were, uh, how do you sustain a notion of unbreachable inferiority? And I could go on and on about that. I won't. But you get into definition of what it means to be human, and you're in really dangerous territory.
Will you come back on the podcast when the book comes out and we can have another fantastic conversation?
I would love to talk more to you, Carol.
Okay, good. It's been such a pleasure, Elizabeth. And thank you for sharing your insights and your book and your wisdom with us today on the Whimsy Farm podcast.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing. This is
Thank you.
invaluable, really
Thank you.
invaluable. Take care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye. Thanks to Elizabeth Minnich, author of The Evil of Banality, for being our guest today on the Whimsy Farm podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane, your host and producer. This podcast is produced on the sacred ancestral land of the Anishinaabe people. Thanks to the California band Castle House for writing and performing our music. Thanks to our underwriter, Just Play Productions, and to our paid Patreon members for their support of today's podcast. If you'd like to offer your support, please visit whimsyfarm.net and click the Patreon link to find a level of support that's right for you. There's also a free membership level. You can email me through the website as well. That's whimsyfarm.net. The Whimsy Farm podcast airs the 1st and 15th of each month on our YouTube channel, Carolyn Crane and Whimsy Farm, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find links to audio and video and Patreon all at whimsyfarm.net. Be sure to join us on August 1st when we travel to New England to speak with Jewish poets for Palestine. Until then, remember the words of Utah Phillips, who said, "Too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic." Get out there and create some positive change. Stay safe, everyone.
whimsyfarms.net